We like to believe we are rational creatures, that our opinions are forged by logic, that our choices emerge from deliberate thought, and that reason rules our behavior. This illusion comforts us, it flatters us, and it blinds us. In reality, reason is rarely the driver. More often, it is the spokesperson, elegantly dressed, articulate, and always late to the scene. We feel first, we justify second. The mechanisms of our convictions lie beneath the surface. Tribal instincts, social pressures, biological shortcuts. Reason arrives only after the decision has already been made, offering a post facto explanation, like a lawyer defending a client it barely knows. Cognitive scientists have shown, again and again, the brain isn't designed for truth, it's designed for survival, for coherence, for fitting in. Logic is just one of many tools, and not even the most frequently used. What matters is not what's true, but what's useful, familiar, safe. This becomes dangerous when we start confusing familiarity with truth. The more often we hear something, the more likely we are to believe it. Not because it's supported by evidence, but because our neurons have rehearsed it. Repetition feels like reality. And in a world flooded with headlines, feeds, and echo chambers, repetition is cheap, which means illusion is easy. The most terrifying thing? Smart people are not less susceptible to this. They're often more so. Intelligence doesn't protect against bias, it refines it. The sharper the mind, the more sophisticated the rationalizations. We don't think more clearly, we think more convincingly, especially to ourselves. So the real threat to truth is not ignorance, it's certainty. Certainty makes us stop questioning, stop listening, stop thinking. It calcifies curiosity into ideology. And once that happens, reason no longer guides us. It serves us, like a loyal PR team spinning every contradiction into a coherent story. This is the illusion we must face, that being right and feeling right are not the same. That intuition is not evidence. That conviction is not clarity. To think clearly in the modern world is not a default. It is a rebellion. It begins with doubt, with the uncomfortable possibility that you, yes, you, might be wrong, that your beliefs are not sacred, that your worldview, no matter how eloquent, is incomplete. Only when reason is stripped of its arrogance can it become what it was meant to be, not a weapon, but a compass. And the first step toward using that compass is admitting how often we're lost. In 1961, in a quiet lab at Yale University, an unassuming experiment shattered our illusions about human nature. Psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to answer a haunting question. How could ordinary people, teachers, clerks, neighbors, become agents in one of history's darkest atrocities? His method was simple, almost absurd. Volunteers were told they were helping with a study on learning. They sat before a switchboard of increasing voltage levels and were instructed to administer electric shocks to a stranger in another room whenever that person gave a wrong answer. The stranger was, of course, an actor. No shocks were actually delivered, but the screams they heard, the begging, the silence, all of it felt real. And here's what happened. 65% of participants went all the way, pressing the final switch, marked danger, severe shock. Some trembled, some laughed nervously, some protested. But they obeyed. Not because they were evil, not because they were monsters, but because a man in a lab coat told them to. This experiment, repeated across cultures and decades, exposed something we don't like to admit. Obedience isn't a flaw in our character, it's a feature of our biology. From an evolutionary perspective, obedience to authority wasn't dangerous. It was essential. In tribes, Following orders meant safety, survival, cohesion. Dissent meant exile, vulnerability, risk. Our ancestors didn't survive because they questioned everything. They survived because they listened to whoever held the spear, the fire, the story. And that legacy remains. Modern humans don't need spears anymore. We have credentials, badges, suits, titles. And our obedience hasn't vanished. It's simply changed shape. We follow influencers instead of elders, headlines instead of first-hand evidence, institutions instead of instincts. The urge to obey is not just social, it is somatic. We feel it in our bodies. The quiet tightening of the jaw, the hesitancy in speech, the nervous laughter when confronting authority. This is why even intelligent people can fall into the machinery of harmful systems. Not because they lack logic, but because logic often yields to hierarchy. We are far more attuned to social cues than moral truths. And those in power understand this. They don't need to suppress information. They only need to present it with authority. Dress it in a uniform, deliver it through an official channel. Wrap it in urgency. The brain doesn't vet the content. It checks the context. Does this feel legitimate? Is asked long before, is this actually true? Milgram's findings were not just about the past. They were a mirror to the present. In every workplace where silence reigns, in every institution that rewards conformity over courage, obedience thrives. Polite, smiling, and unchallenged. But the most disturbing part? The people who pressed the button slept well. They didn't see themselves as cruel. They thought they were doing the right thing, because that's how obedience works. It cloaks itself in virtue. It whispers, "You're just following instructions." And that whisper is enough to drown out the scream on the other side of the wall. To understand obedience is not to excuse it, but to recognize how easily it takes root. Not in the minds of villains, but in the hearts of good people. And until we confront that, we will keep mistaking compliance for morality and wonder why history keeps repeating itself. Imagine this. You're in a room with 9 other people. A simple task is laid out. Match a line to one of 3 comparison lines. The answer is obvious. Line A is clearly longer than the others. But when the first 9 people, seemingly random participants like you, all say it's line C, what do? This was the setup of Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments in the 1950s. The twist? The first 9 were in on it. Only the 10th participant was unaware. And what did they do? 3 out of 4 people conformed to the group at least once, knowingly giving the wrong answer, not because they were confused, but because they didn't want to stand out, not because they believed the lie, but because they feared the cost of truth. That's groupthink, and it doesn't just distort perception, it rewires belief. We often imagine ourselves as independent thinkers, brave enough to speak truth in a crowd of lies. But the reality? Most of us would rather be wrong together than right alone. Because deep down, humans are not designed for truth. We are designed for belonging. The brain is a social organ. Our neural wiring prioritizes safety within the group over accuracy. Disagreement isn't just uncomfortable. It feels like danger. And so, in subtle ways, we begin to adapt. We smooth out our convictions. We mirror the language around us. We unconsciously shift to preserve harmony, even if that harmony is built on delusion, and the group rewards us for it. We are praised not for what we think, but for how well we align. On social media, in classrooms, in offices, the same dynamic unfolds. Echoes get amplified. Doubts get silenced. Certainty becomes currency, and the loudest voice defines the truth. It's not that people stop thinking, It's that thinking becomes a liability. Bonhoeffer saw this up close. He watched as intellectuals, clergy, scientists, people who once prided themselves on independent thought, abandoned critical judgment in favor of collective delusion. Nazi Germany didn't rise because of a few charismatic leaders. It rose because millions of ordinary people, out of fear or fatigue, chose consensus over conscience. And today, the architecture of groupthink is more powerful than ever. Algorithms don't just connect us, they curate our reality. They show us what we already agree with, filter out dissent, and reward emotional certainty. The more confident and conformist your belief, the more visibility it gets. What was once a group of 10 in a room is now 10,000 in a comment section. But the mechanism is the same. When everyone agrees, disagreement feels like betrayal. The danger is not just in falsehood, it's in the loss of friction, the absence of dissent. When everyone starts sounding the same, thinking the same, posting the same, you're not in a community, you're in a cult. And the terrifying part? You might not notice it happening, because groupthink doesn't feel like coercion. It feels like comfort, like belonging, like finally being understood. That's what makes it so effective and so dangerous. To resist groupthink is not just a matter of intelligence, it's a matter of courage, the courage to feel alone, to sound strange, to be the only one saying, "I think this is wrong." Bonhoeffer knew what that cost. He paid it. The question is, will we? Ignorance today isn't a passive absence of knowledge. It's an active, systemic product, carefully designed, endlessly reinforced, and, disturbingly, profitable. Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood this long before the digital age. He saw that stupidity, or what we might more precisely call functional ignorance, doesn't emerge from a lack of intelligence, but from a surrender of one's mental autonomy. And more importantly, it thrives not in isolation, but in carefully constructed systems that reward obedience and discourage scrutiny. This is the architecture of ignorance. Let's look at how it works. Step 1. Overload the system. Today, the average person is bombarded by more information in a day than someone a century ago encountered in a year. Notifications, news alerts, tweets, emails, opinions, outrage, noise. It becomes impossible to think deeply when your attention is constantly fractured, and the brain, overwhelmed, reaches for shortcuts. Step 2. Monetize reaction. Platforms don't reward truth, they reward engagement. And engagement is driven by emotional responses. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Certainty outperforms doubt. The more primitive your reaction, the more profitable your data. The result? A digital economy built not on understanding, but on impulsive noise. Step 3. Engineer friction, not in consuming content, but in questioning it. Misinformation is easy. Critical thinking is exhausting. Try tracing a viral claim back to a source. Try understanding the nuance behind a policy. It takes time, effort, discipline. And in a culture built on speed, that friction discourages inquiry. It's simply more efficient to scroll. Step 4. Reward conformity. Say the right thing, share the right take, align with the tribe. Whether political, ideological, or even aesthetic, the system favors alignment. The risk of deviation becomes social exile. And so, slowly, unconsciously, people begin self-censoring. Not because they're silenced, but because they've learned it's safer not to speak. And finally, step 5, manufacture fatigue. Keep people economically insecure, mentally exhausted. When survival takes up all your energy, there's none left for discernment. And here's the brutal truth. Under stress, our minds are designed to simplify. We want easy answers, clean stories, familiar villains. That's when slogans replace thinking. That's when propaganda thrives. Bonhoeffer called this process intellectual surrender. And he was right. But now, it's not just social or political, it's algorithmic, it's scalable, it's global. What once required a regime now only requires a feed. And here's the irony. The people caught in these systems don't think they're ignorant. In fact, they often believe they're well-informed. But what they're consuming isn't knowledge, it's affirmation. Their worldview is not shaped by evidence, but by repetition. It's not inquiry, it's inertia. This is how the architecture holds. And unless it is deliberately challenged, it remains invisible. That's what makes it so powerful. People don't notice the structure, they only feel the outcome: confusion, exhaustion, certainty, obedience. And so they continue operating within the design, unaware that their own minds are being shaped by forces they cannot see. Bonhoeffer's warning echoes louder than ever. The greatest danger isn't evil intent. It's a society where critical thought becomes optional, then rare, then punished. And if we don't actively build alternative architectures, spaces that reward complexity, humility, and evidence, ignorance will remain the default operating system of our world. Are you ready to explore how we break this cycle? To resist the architecture of ignorance is not simply a matter of access to better information. It demands something far rarer and far more difficult to cultivate: intellectual courage. This is not the courage of the battlefield or the protest line. It's quieter, often lonelier. It's the courage to question what everyone else accepts, to say, "I don't know," when certainty is expected, to ask, "Why do I believe this?" when the answer might unravel part of your identity. Because true thinking is dangerous, not to society, but to comfort. And most people, if given the choice, will trade depth for belonging. That's what makes intellectual courage radical. It begins with doubt. Not the performative doubt of contrarians, but the disciplined doubt of someone who wants to know what's real, not just what's rewarded. This kind of doubt doesn't seek to destroy, it seeks to clarify. It asks, "Am I seeing clearly? Or am I just repeating?" It continues with silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but of reflection. In a world that rewards immediate reaction, to pause is subversive. Silence gives space for complexity to emerge, for contradictory ideas to coexist. And from that silence, something rare can grow: discernment. Then comes the decision to speak, not loudly, not always publicly, but with integrity. Intellectual courage often manifests in moments no one sees, choosing not to retweet a lie, even if it flatters your side, choosing to read something that might change your mind, choosing to listen, even, especially, when it's uncomfortable. But this courage has a cost. You will be misunderstood. You will be criticized, not just by those who disagree, but by those on your side who see nuance as betrayal. You will lose some comfort, some certainty, maybe even some community. And yet, you gain something else. You gain your mind back. In Bonhoeffer's view, stupidity was not simply a flaw. It was a moral failure when chosen. But to resist it required more than knowledge. It required the will to stay awake, the will to remain human in a system that prefers predictability. Intellectual courage is how we stay human. It is the quiet refusal to let algorithms write your thoughts. It is the daily practice of attention, the discipline of asking better questions, the humility to know you are always to some extent wrong. But that doesn't mean you stop asking. And here's what's hopeful. Courage is contagious. When one person chooses honesty over applause, it gives others permission. When someone publicly revises their view, not because they were forced, but because they learned, it makes growth visible again. And when ideas are pursued with curiosity instead of contempt, discourse becomes possible. That's how cultures change. Not through outrage, through example. But none of it starts with the system. It starts with the individual. With you. Do you have the courage to think? There comes a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes violent, when every society is asked a question. Who will stand? Not with flags, not with slogans, but with their mind intact. Because when conformity becomes virtue and thinking becomes deviance, it takes more than knowledge to resist. It takes integrity, and even more than that, presence. A refusal to vanish into the collective fog of convenience. Bonhoeffer asked this question in a time of collapse. He watched as his country, filled with educated, cultured people, slid willingly into barbarism. Not because they were evil, but because they stopped thinking. They surrendered to noise, to slogans, to comfort. And in doing so, they became tools of something they did not understand. His question, who stands fast, wasn't rhetorical. It was urgent. It remains urgent. Because history doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes. And today, the pressure to conform doesn't arrive in jackboots. It arrives in notifications, in filtered feeds, in the low hum of algorithmic consensus. It tells you what's safe to think, what's acceptable to feel, what questions are no longer permitted. And most people, as always, comply. Not because they are weak, but because thinking hurts, because doubt isolates, because certainty sells. But some, not many, choose to stand. Not because they believe they are right, but because they know that thinking is the only way to become less wrong. They are the ones who ask uncomfortable questions even when the room goes quiet, who change their minds in public, who say, "I don't know," with dignity, who hold complexity when others demand certainty. They aren't saints. They don't always get it right. But they refuse to become slogans. In them, something precious survives. Not just reason, but conscience. In them, the human spirit remains audible, however faintly, beneath the static of noise. To stand today does not mean grand rebellion. It means daily resistance to mental laziness. It means logging off when the outrage is too easy. It means listening when your instincts scream to defend. It means noticing when you're being manipulated and choosing to pause, to breathe, to ask again, what is true? The world does not need more hot takes. It needs more cold thought. And it needs people, ordinary people, who are willing to pay the price of intellectual freedom, who understand that in an age of curated reality and manufactured consensus, the most radical act is to think with clarity. That doesn't make you better. It just makes you human. And humanity, as Bonhoeffer warned, is not a given. It's a choice, a daily choice, one that must be made again and again. So who will stand? Not the loudest, not the smartest, but the most awake. The ones who ask not just, "What do I think?" but "How do I know?" The ones who are willing to be misunderstood in exchange for being real. The ones who choose truth over tribe, because, in the end, the future doesn't belong to the algorithm. It belongs to those who remember how to think. And that, quietly, stubbornly, is enough to begin. Thank you for watching this video till the end. If you found it interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new content. To dive deeper into the topic, be sure to check out our previous videos.